All right, so we're going through a lot of the muscles of respiration. We started with posterior thoracic muscles of inspiration. We covered the levator costarum, brevis and longus, that reach down from the thoracic vertebrae, reach down and out to the ribs. And when they contract, they elevate the ribs. We talked about the serratus posterior, that does the same thing, but looking at this image, you can see that they're much longer at a more horizontal angle than the levator costerums. And to remind you that any muscle that reaches down to the rib cage, when it contracts, as far as the rib cage is concerned, it can only elevate the rib cage. The muscles that reach up and insert into the rib cage, when these muscles contract, they're going to pull the rib cage down. So muscles of inspiration are largely those muscles that reach inferiorly down to insert into the ribs for the elevation of the rib cage, to expand volume of the lungs, decreasing alveolar pressure below atmospheric pressure, causing air to flow from the atmosphere or the environment into the body. So that's inspiration. Muscles of expiration, the accessory muscles of expiration, reach up and insert into the rib cage. So when they contract, they're pulling the rib cage down, decreasing the volume of the ribs, increasing alveolar pressure above atmospheric pressure, which expels air back into the atmosphere from the lungs. We talked about the sternocleidomastoid and the scalenes, which are muscles of the neck that originate up here and reach down and insert into the bony thorax. So when they contract, they can contract to elevate the rib cage. But elevation of the rib cage isn't the only thing they can do. So a lot of the muscles we're going to talk about moving forward, like the scalenes or the sternocleidomastoid, they have different functions depending on how you use them. So for instance, when we talked about the anterior and the middle scalenes, looking at them here, you can see that they reach down and grab the rib cage. So you can contract those muscles and use them to elevate the ribs. Or, depending on what the rest of your body is doing, you can contract those muscles unilaterally on one side of your neck, and it'll rotate your head towards the side of contraction. So muscles don't have to have just one function. Oftentimes they have multiple functions. And covering the muscles of the upper arm and shoulder, this is going to become obvious because we're going to start with pectoralis major. So the pectoralis major, these are your pecs, as they're known. You know, you go to the gym, working on your pecs, using the butterfly machine or whatever. Haven't actually seen or done anything like that, but I saw them in high school, so I vaguely know what they are. But looking at this muscle here, you can see that it originates along the sternum, along the clavicle, and it courses over to insert into the humerus, which is your upper bone of your arm. So if we're looking at this muscle here, it's going to do one of two things. If my arm is out here, and my pectoralis major, which is fanned out like this, if it contracts, it can work to move my arm medially. So I contract the pectoralis major and bring it in. If I leave my arms where they are and I contract my pectoralis major bilaterally, it is going to contract and it is going to pull the bony thorax. It's going to pull the rib cage out anteriorly, and it's going to assist in elevating the sternum. So if I am pulling my sternum out, if I am pulling my sternum out, I'm increasing the transverse dimension of the rib cage. If I'm increasing the dimension of the rib cage, then I am increasing the volume of the lungs. So pectoralis major can be used to move your arms, or it can be used as a muscle of inspiration. For pectoralis minor is beneath pectoralis major. It is deep to pectoralis major. You can see that pectoralis minor, being a smaller set of muscles, is originating on the ribs, sort of the middle ribs, ribs 2 through 5, and then reaching up to insert into the scapula. So, of course, you can see that when this muscle contracts, it's going to work to elevate and increase the transverse dimension of the rib cage. So, pectoralis minor can act as a muscle of inspiration. And here's a couple of nice illustrations. All right, moving on to the next 2 or 3 muscles, we have the serratus anterior and the subclavius. So we talked about the serratus posterior superior already. Here's the next serratus muscle. And looking at this image here, or this image here, you can see that it originates on the ribs, like up in here, and it courses up to insert into the scapula. So you can see, looking at this image, that if those muscles were to contract, they are going to elevate the rib cage, thereby possibly assisting in inspiration. I like to think of the serratus anterior as basically your superhero muscles. So anytime anyone in high school is drawing a superhero like Spider-Man, Superman, whatever, they're always going to illustrate those muscles right here, the serratus anterior. The subclavius is a small muscle, is exactly what it sounds like, subclavius. It's beneath the clavicle. All right, here's the subclavius. This is a small muscle. It's hard to even find a decent illustration of it, but it originates laterally on the clavicle, beneath the clavicle, subclavius, and it courses and inserts into the superior surface of the first rib near the sternum. So these are just 2 little muscles right here, and when they contract, they can function to elevate the rib cage. Therefore, they can act as muscles of inspiration. There's a lot of muscles on the back listed here that we use as stabilizers of our posture as we breathe, as we're going through respiration and communication. I'm not going to go through them all, but just to know that all these muscles provide postural support for respiration and speech. So thinking back to the first group of lectures, these guys are synergists.